Today on Free Sailing Tutorials, we're going to be talking about air draft. What is it? How do you calculate it? And what happens if you get it wrong? Let's have a look. Let's draw. Fred, it's my drawing again, so it's going to be pretty awful. Let's assume that we have a we'll have a river bank here. Okay, and then we're going to have the other river bank like so. Next thing we'll see, we'll have a bridge. Let's put a bridge in over that river. So the bridge might come over the river like so. And then we're going to have a chart datum, so that's the lowest depth you would usually expect to see at any time during the year, lowest astronomical tide, effectively. So we're looking at, say, a chart datum. Let's put that in as there. So this area, or rather that depth, is our chart datum. Okay, so we should always have that much water. Then we're going to have a highest astronomical tide, HAT, highest astronomical tide, and that is basically the opposite of chart datum. So it's the equivalent of the highest tide that you should ever get. Okay, so highest astronomical tide, let's put that in like so. Okay, and that's HAT. Right, so between those two, obviously, we have got a notional tidal movement. So you're going to have a tidal during any day. You're going to have, on a specific day, you're going to have a low water, and you're going to have a high water. Okay, so that would be the highest high water before the highest astronomical tide, which will at some point be the same thing, obviously, on 1 day a year or 2 days a year, and low water would be high water springs and low water springs. Okay, so depending on if you're on springs, if you're on the day of springs, then high water springs will be the high tide and low water springs will be the low tide. And then you're going to have high water neaps, and low water neaps. So we've got chart datum. This area, this is going to be the minimum depth you should expect. Minimum depth of water any time during the year. So in this particular example, there's always going to be water in the river. Okay. Now, it may not be a lot of water, but there will be water in the river. So let's, just for an example here, let's say that chart datum, and let's say it's uniform across the river, which of course it wouldn't be, usually. And we'll say chart datum is 0.3 meters. Okay. So if we can work out the tidal height for different times of the day for a particular tidal period, then we can work out where the water will be, the water height will be at that time. If we can work out the height of water, we can work out whether or not we have got enough depth for our sailing boat to be sailing, and also for whether or not our mast is going to clear the bridge. All right. So what we're going to do now is transpose onto this a yacht and put in some numbers here, and then we'll do the calculation. Okay, so as you can see, my drawing is not exactly brilliant, but hopefully this will make sense to you. So these are varying water levels, and of course the water will go from lowest possible in the year, chart datum effectively, all the way up to the highest astronomical tide for the year. And depending on the day, you're going to have tidal ranges between the two. Now it's pretty clear. This is our wonderful yacht, and the draft of the yacht is calculated from the waterline to the bottom of the keel. Okay, so most yachts you'd expect to be between about 1.6 and say 2.5 meters, most small yachts. So that is the figure that's in the boat information that you've got, okay, and that will give you your draft. So it's important that we get the right amount of water and pass under the bridge at the right time. So as always, we're going to want to have a safety margin underneath us. So we've got chart datum plus a little bit of water, and that's giving us a safety margin underneath the bottom of the keel. We're going to have a draft of the vessel, and then we're going to have this from top of the mast down to waterline, which is the air draft of the vessel, which again would be in your paperwork. Now, of course, the air draft, in extreme circumstances, it's going to change dependent on how much weight you have in the vessel. Of course, the more weight you've got in there, it's going to drop down into the sea. So if this vessel had not been fitted out and was being moved from the factory, you would need to remember that the draft is going to be different, although in that circumstance it's likely that the mast would not be a problem because it wouldn't yet be stepped. Okay, so we need to work out at what state of tide we have enough safety margin under us to sail under here and enough safety margin over us to clear the bridge. And at that time, for that window, we can calculate that it would be safe for us to cross under the bridge. So let's do that now. So the first thing we need to work out is what the tidal range is going to be for the day that we're talking about. So we go to our almanac, we fill in our tidal curve, and we work out for this location what the tidal range will be for that tidal period. Okay, so if you don't know how to do that, at the end of this video there will be a link to how to calculate tides in standard ports and also how to calculate tides in secondary ports. So you can go to those and work out and find out how to work out those tidal ranges. But we are, for this example, we're going to assume that we know what the tidal heights will be at specific times, and also that we've calculated the range already on the curve. So the curve gives us the speed at which the tide comes in and goes out, and therefore the speed at which the height of tide comes up and goes down. Okay, so we're going to make assumptions for this and this calculation rather than get into that detail. So we've got tidal information, which we've taken from our tidal curve for the period of the day that we're talking about, and that's high water at 4.2 meters and low water at 1.6 meters. And then we've got our chart and vessel information. So the air draft of the vessel, which we would get from our the information on our vessel, is 16 meters, and the air draft of the bridge, which would be on our chart, is 15 meters. The draft of our vessel, the water draft of our vessel, is 1.8 meters. So to keep things simple here, I've said the air draft of the bridge is 15 metres. That would normally be known, it's a charted clearance for the bridge. And that will be shown in the chart. I'll show you an example of what that looks like here. Okay, so that's so that you can see what that refers to in terms of the height of the bridge. And that is taken from highest astronomical tide to the point on the bridge, the highest point on the bridge. So let's assume that we need to work out a time during the day or the night where we can clear safely under the bridge, not go aground, so have a safety margin of water underneath us, and also not hit the bridge, so have a safety margin above the top of our mast. So with the information that we've got, we can then work out how much water we need to have as a maximum and a minimum in order to meet those parameters. Okay, so in this scenario we're going to assume that it's going to be quite tight, isn't it, because it's a low bridge. So we want 2 meters of safety above us and 60 centimeters of safety below us, so that we've got a meter either way to allow for things like barometric pressure changes, which might change the height of water, or a miscalculation even, or the fact that maybe there's an onshore or offshore wind delaying or speeding up the ingress or egress of water in the river. Okay, so let's have a look at this. We've got a required safety at the masthead of 1 meter, and we already know that the clearance of the bridge is 1 meter less than the air draft of the vessel. So if we have 1 meter less than highest astronomical tide, that will bring the masthead to the bridge height. Well, we don't want that. We want it lower than that. We want it lower by 1 meter. So we're going to reduce that. We're going to say we need to be 2 meters underneath highest astronomical tide in order to be sure to clear the bridge by 1 meter. But I want an extra meter of safety. So I want to be 3 meters lower than highest astronomical tide, so that I should be 1 meter under the bridge with 1 meter of safety, so 2 meters under the bridge. So let's do that calculation. Okay, so 3 meters less than highest astronomical tide in this year. It's 5.2 meters highest astronomical tide, which for these purposes we're going to use as the highest tide of the year in the almanac. So highest tide of the year is 5.2 meters. 3 meters less than that would be 2.2 meters. So we need 2.2 meters of tide in order to have a 2 meter gap between the top of our mast and the bridge. So if we look at our tidal range for the day, we've got 4.2 meters at high water and 1.6 meters at low water. So it is within the range. So we know that we will be able to do that during that range. So we just need to look at our tidal curve now and work out when we have got a tidal height of 2.2 meters. Okay, so we know the depth of water we need to make sure that we clear the bridge. But at that depth of water, are we able to sail under the bridge without going aground? So we need to do a calculation based on our draft and look at the depth. So let's assume we want 60 centimeters of safety underneath our keel. That's fairly tight, but enough. Well, the draft of the vessel is 1.8 meters, and the safety we want is 60 centimeters, 0.6 of a meter. So that means we need a total amount of water there of 2.4 meters in order to float 60 centimeters above the seabed. There's a chart datum, that's existing water there already at any state of tide of 0.3 meters. So we can take that off the 2.4 because we're looking at how much tide we need to have in. So 2.4 less 0.3 is 2.1. So we need to be going under the bridge when we've got 2.1 meters of tide in order to make sure we've got 60 centimeters underneath us in terms of the water at that time. And, well, quite conveniently, we know that 2.2 meters of water is required. No more than 2.2 meters of water is required in order to clear safely under the bridge with 2 meters above the masthead. So if we are leaving or entering a port under this bridge, we want to be there on a falling tide at 2.2 meters of tide, and on a rising tide at 2.1 meters in a perfect world, and that gives us even more safety margin. However, it is worth just looking at these figures again. We know that we've got a 1.8 meter draft. We know there's 30 centimeters, 0.3 meters of chart datum, and we know the lowest tide in this tidal phase is 1.6 meters. So 1.6 meters plus chart datum of 0.3 meters gives us 1.9 meters, and we draw 1.8 meters. So worst case scenario, in this tidal period, we shouldn't go aground. We should have 10 centimeters under us. So the good news is that if we arrive there at low water, we should go through and have maximum air draft clearance. But we don't want to go aground, so that's why we arrive a little after low water, so that we have a better clearance on draft, so that we can smoothly go under the bridge without going aground, but still have plenty of clearance above our masthead. Okay, so what we've done there is we've established that air draft is the distance between the top of your mast, or the highest point on your vessel, and the waterline. And the clearance, when you're going under a bridge, charted clearance that the bridge has, is measured between the bridge, the bottom of the bridge, and the level at which highest astronomical tide would normally reach. So the highest astronomical tide, in reality, the best way to look at that is to look at the highest spring of the year and to assume that that is the highest astronomical tide. So you can calculate your bridge clearance between the highest point on the bridge and the line of highest astronomical tide. You can then deduct the amount of tide that you need to lose from highest astronomical tide in order to pass under the bridge. So as we've already said in the video you've just seen, if we've got a 16 meter air draft on our vessel and we've got a 15 meter clearance at highest astronomical tide, we are going to need to have 1 meter less than highest astronomical tide for us to just touch the bridge, 1 meter less than that to have a meter of clearance, and 1 meter less than that to have a meter of clearance plus a meter of safety. So that's 3 meters less than the tidal height at highest astronomical tide. If we assume highest astronomical tide is the highest spring of the year, then we saw in that example it was 5.2 meters, I think. So 5.2 meters less the 3 meters that we need to give us the 2 meter clearance onto the bridge will take us to 2.2 meters. The 2.2 meters, all we need to do then is know that if we've got 2.2 meters of tide or less, we'll get under the bridge. Okay, so we go to our tidal curve, we work out when we're going to have 2.2 meters or less of tide. That is safe for us to get under the bridge. Then we need to also look at our draft of our vessel, and we need to make sure that with a 1.8 meter draft and 0.3 meters of chart datum, that's what existing water, that means we need to have 1.5 meters of tide, plus the 0.3 is 1.8 meters of depth of water. So we would just be touching the bottom. We want to add 60 centimeters into that, don't we, to give us the extra safety underneath us to float over. So we ended up with a 2.1 meter, between 2.1 and 2.2 meters of tide being a nice safe time to cross under the bridge with plenty of safety above us and enough safety below us. Okay, so that's dealing with air drafts. It's worth checking and double checking. Also allow for things like barometric pressure. If you've got a very low barometric pressure, you may well find that you are significantly higher than you expect to be. So if you work out as a rule of thumb that 1013 millibars is the average air pressure at the surface of the planet. So if you were 10 millibars above that at 1023,
in a high pressure area, you might be looking at 10 centimeters difference in tidal height, in the amount of water that you've got there. So high pressure means you're going to have less water there. Low pressure means you're going to have more water there. So that's why you need to give yourself some safety. That and the fact that onshore and offshore winds can also make a difference. So always allow for safety margins, and always try and go under these things nice and slowly with the best clearance, and then that way you're giving yourself the best chance of not getting into trouble. So I hope that helped. Please do put comments in the section below if there's any questions you have. If you haven't yet visited the website, please visit freesailingtutorials.com. There are forums there, which I've just started. You can ask questions in the forums. Most of the forums, or some of the forums, are free. Other forums are for premium members, but you can always trial premium membership for 30 days for free. And otherwise, you're very welcome to join and sign up and subscribe, and see you soon.
I hope you found this short video tutorial useful. If you did, please click the like button. This helps promote the video on YouTube. If you've got any of your own tips or experience you'd like to share, or you've got an idea for a video, let me know in the comments section below. And if you aren't already a subscriber, consider subscribing, and remember to click the little bell so you're notified when I release my next video. There are various links that might interest you in the description section under this video. Until next time, sail safe.